They were Asian women who left their homeland to build new lives in foreign countries. They believed in love, believed in the men by their sides. But behind the appearance of happiness, danger was lurking. Today, we'll dive deep into two shocking murder cases that occurred in two different countries, more than a decade apart, yet share one terrifying common thread: husbands who were willing to kill their own wives. On the evening of September 30th, 2010, at around 7:30 p.m., a 27-year-old Chinese woman named Sun Dan was driving back to her apartment complex in the Balga area of Perth, Australia. Sitting beside her was her mother, Kang Shenji, who was 53 years old at the time. The two had just been out somewhere, and Sun Dan was planning to stop by her grandmother's house to pick up her young daughter Kiki, who was playing there. Everything seemed completely normal until Sun Dan pulled into the parking area and noticed something strange. Right in front of her, an unfamiliar car was blocking her path, while behind her, another vehicle had just pulled up, cutting off her escape route. Confused by the situation, Sun Dan asked her mother to step out of the car and find out what was going on. But the moment Mrs. Kang opened the door and stepped out, a figure suddenly emerged from the car parked behind them. It was a stranger with long hair hanging down over their face, dark skin, and a large muscular build. Before Mrs. Kang could react, this person raised a spear gun and fired directly at her. Fortunately, Mrs. Kang managed to dodge to the side just in time, narrowly escaping the deadly shot. The spear flew past her and pierced through the wall into a neighbor's apartment. However, missing the first shot didn't deter the attacker. The wild-haired figure immediately returned to the car, grabbed an iron hammer, and charged straight at Mrs. Kang, who stood frozen in terror. The attacker swung the hammer repeatedly, striking her head multiple times. Mrs. Kang collapsed on the spot, falling unconscious. After taking down Mrs. Kang, the killer turned and walked directly toward the driver's seat where Sun Dan was sitting. The attacker swung the blood-stained hammer and smashed through the car window. Glass shattered everywhere. Reaching inside, the attacker yanked the door open, climbed into the passenger seat right next to Sun Dan. By now, the attacker was holding a knife. Without a word, the killer stabbed Sun Dan multiple times as she sat there in extreme panic, unable to fight back or escape. When it was over, the attacker calmly moved to the driver's seat, started the victim's car, and sped away, quickly disappearing from the scene. Residents nearby heard the commotion and rushed out to witness the horrifying scene. They immediately called the police. By the time officers arrived at the scene, Sun Dan was slumped over in the driver's seat, covered in blood, showing no signs of life. She had died on the spot. Her mother, Mrs. Kang, lay motionless on the ground next to the car, having suffered severe head trauma. Paramedics who arrived shortly after immediately loaded her into an ambulance and rushed her to the hospital. The apartment complex where Sun Dan lived was located in a fairly remote area with sparse surroundings, so the surveillance camera coverage was very limited. After scanning the entire area, police could only find a single video clip from a neighbor's security camera that captured an image of a suspicious vehicle. Continuing their investigation, going door to door to question residents, police found an important witness. This person reported seeing a white Magna sedan parked directly across from the victim's home for about 2 hours before the incident occurred. When Sun Dan and her mother drove up, the Magna immediately started up and moved to block them from behind. The other vehicle blocking the front was a gray Mercedes two-door coupe. This meant the car carrying Sun Dan and her mother was trapped in the middle with no way to escape. The witness also mentioned catching a glimpse of the killer's profile, but noted that the attacker was heavily disguised at the time, making it impossible to identify their true face. Using the initial clues they had gathered, police extracted all data from surveillance cameras in the area. After careful analysis, they identified the white Magna that had appeared at the crime scene. When they ran a search on the vehicle registration, a name came up. The owner of the car was none other than Xiao Nuo, Sun Dan's husband. Digging deeper, police also discovered that the couple was in the middle of divorce proceedings and had already separated, living in different places. Police immediately decided to search Xiao Nuo's residence. Sure enough, inside his home, they found a spear gun matching the exact description provided by the witness. All the evidence pointed in one direction. Xiao Nuo was quickly placed at the top of the suspect list. But just as police were preparing to issue an arrest warrant, a piece of information left everyone stunned. Immigration records showed that Xiao Nuo had left Australia and flown back to China 2 weeks before the murder occurred. This meant that at the time Sun Dan was killed, Xiao Nuo was thousands of miles away, nowhere near Perth. He had what appeared to be a perfect, irrefutable alibi. So who was the real killer? Could it be that the person who murdered Sun Dan and her mother was someone else entirely? Faced with this development, police were forced to change direction in their investigation. They began digging into Sun Dan's personal background and social connections, looking to see if she had any enemies. However, the results showed that Sun Dan was a woman who lived a very private life with an extremely small social circle. Besides running a small nail salon, she spent her time studying English and caring for her daughter. She had no conflicts or disputes with anyone and no significant enemies. From every angle, there was no reason for an outsider to want to harm her to such an extent. After careful consideration, police decided to shift their focus back to the husband, Xiao Nuo. Although he had a clear alibi, another theory was raised. Was it possible that Xiao Nuo had hired someone else to do the killing for him? To better understand the suspect, police began investigating Xiao Nuo's background. At the time, he was 30 years old, originally from Liaoning province in China. His father held the position of logistics director at a major university in Liaoning. His uncle was a member of the standing committee of the Liaoning Provincial Party Committee, wielding considerable political power. His mother ran a construction company. A family like this was both wealthy and powerful in the local area, the kind of prominent family that commanded respect from everyone. Growing up in such an environment, Xiao Nuo was a genuine trust fund kid, accustomed to a life of luxury from childhood, getting whatever he wanted, never having to endure hardship or go without anything. As for the relationship between Xiao Nuo and Sun Dan, their fathers had actually been colleagues. It was this connection that led both families to arrange and facilitate the match, bringing the young couple together in marriage. In April 2008, Xiao Nuo and Sun Dan held a lavish wedding at the Perth Convention and Exhibition Center. This was Xiao Nuo's second marriage, and Sun Dan was his new wife. In the early days after they moved in together, the couple did experience a period of sweetness and happiness like many newlyweds. Neighbors in the residential area frequently spotted the two walking their pet dog together or cruising around in their luxury sports car on weekend afternoons. On the surface, they appeared to be a beautiful, well-matched couple. After getting married, Xiao Nuo decided to immigrate to Australia and start a new life there. His days in Australia were extremely comfortable and carefree. He had a passion for scuba diving and spearfishing, often heading out to sea to indulge in his hobbies. In terms of assets, Xiao Nuo owned 3 properties in Australia, with a combined value exceeding $1.5 million, not to mention an expensive Mercedes 2-door coupe. Additionally, he was the registered owner of 2 companies there, both operating in the import-export business. However, there was one rather interesting and somewhat puzzling detail. Despite owning substantial assets and running 2 businesses, the official job Xiao Nuo registered with Australian authorities was merely a part-time security guard position. His daily routine involved walking his German Shepherd around the neighborhood on patrol. A wealthy heir, owner of multiple properties and businesses, working as a security guard walking a dog around the block. Through their investigation, police discovered he was suspected of secretly running an adult massage parlor in the Inglewood area, northeast of Perth. The establishment specialized in providing sensitive services with staff consisting entirely of Asian women. According to records, Xiao Nuo frequently visited this place and had a very close friendship with the shop manager. When police came to interview the manager after the murder, this person insisted that Xiao Nuo was a good person, adding that his wife Sun Dan was also a good friend of mine. The conflict between the couple grew increasingly serious after their daughter was born. The arrival of their first child should have been a bond that brought the family closer together, but instead, it became the source of endless arguments. Xiao Nuo and Sun Dan had completely different views on parenting, each convinced they were right, neither willing to give an inch. Even the smallest matters could turn into topics for them to argue about. The situation became even more complicated when Sun Dan's mother-in-law entered the picture. She came from China to Australia, ostensibly to help care for her grandchild, but in reality, her presence only made things more chaotic. Naturally, she took her son's side in every argument. Not only that, she frequently made hurtful remarks and criticized her daughter-in-law at every turn. In her eyes, Sun Dan could do nothing right, from how she cared for the child to how she treated her husband. As for Sun Dan, she wasn't someone who could be easily bullied either. Having been pampered by her family since childhood, accustomed to living under their protection, she couldn't stand being oppressed or having to swallow her tears in silence. When faced with her mother-in-law's criticisms, she didn't stay quiet, but fought back. And so, this small family was plagued not only by marital conflict, but also by increasingly bitter clashes between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. The atmosphere in the house was always tense. Things reached a boiling point one day when the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law once again got into an argument about caring for the child. Words flew back and forth, the quarrel escalated, and eventually the two women got into a physical altercation right there in the house. When Xiao Nuo learned about this, instead of stepping in to mediate or calm things down, his anger exploded. He placed all the blame on his wife, believing that Sun Dan had dared to lay hands on his mother, something he found completely unacceptable. From that point on, Xiao Nuo's resentment toward Sun Dan continued to build, taking root deep in his mind. Unable to endure it any longer, in April 2010, Sun Dan decided to end this turbulent marriage. She officially filed for divorce at the local Perth court. As soon as the court received the petition, they proceeded with the standard legal procedures, which included freezing all of Xiao Nuo's assets in Australia. By law, these assets would remain frozen until both parties completed the divorce proceedings and the division of property was finalized. This meant that while waiting for the court's ruling, Xiao Nuo couldn't touch a single dollar of his substantial wealth. After filing for divorce, Sun Dan no longer wanted to continue living under the same roof as her husband. She packed her belongings, took her young daughter, and left the luxurious mansion, moving into a small rental apartment in the Balga area. A few days after settling into her new place, following her lawyer's advice, Sun Dan began quietly gathering evidence of Xiao Nuo's wrongdoing throughout their marriage. She hoped that with this evidence, she would have an advantage in the lawsuit, thereby gaining custody of her daughter and being awarded a larger share of the assets. However, somehow the news that Sun Dan was collecting evidence against him reached Xiao Nuo. This information was like a match thrown into a powder keg, hitting his most sensitive nerve. Xiao Nuo knew full well what he had done over the years. The shady dealings, the secrets that couldn't be made public, all of it could be exposed if Sun Dan continued her investigation. He began to feel fearful and started calculating. If things continued in this direction, the consequences would be severe. Not only would he lose his wife and child, but most of the wealth he had built up would be split, and he might even lose custody of his daughter. Thinking about this, Xiao Nuo's hatred for Sun Dan rose to a new level, deeper and more dangerous than ever before. The prolonged divorce battle with its endless arguments left Sun Dan exhausted and drained. Perhaps through a woman's intuition, she sensed that something wasn't right, that some vague danger was lurking somewhere. To get away from the stress and with hopes that things would cool down after some time apart, Sun Dan decided to take her daughter back to China to stay temporarily. But what she never expected happened. One day while they were in China, her young daughter was suddenly kidnapped by a stranger right in the residential community where they were staying. The child vanished without a trace. Sun Dan felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She completely fell apart. In her extreme panic, following her family's advice, Sun Dan contacted the Australian Embassy in China and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to seek their intervention and help. After an investigation, it turned out her daughter hadn't been kidnapped by a stranger at all. The child had been secretly taken back to Perth by her husband's family. At that moment, the little girl was in the home of her paternal grandmother, Xiao Nuo's mother. Upon learning this, Sun Dan didn't hesitate for a second. She immediately bought a plane ticket and flew straight back to Australia to reunite with her daughter. The string of events gave Perth police more reason for suspicion. The Zhao family had already done something as outrageous as kidnapping their own grandchild from China and bringing her back to Australia just to fight for custody. They had no regard for the law, no regard for morality, willing to do anything to achieve their goals. So could Xiao Nuo be capable of taking it even further, committing an even more brutal act by killing his own wife to permanently resolve all his problems? During the expanded investigation, police discovered an important clue. On September 24, 2010, just about a week before the murder, Xiao Nuo had placed a job advertisement in a Chinese-language newspaper published in Sydney. The ad was simple, seeking a driver to drive from Sydney to Perth with generous pay. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary job posting, but when cross-referenced with immigration records, things became very strange. According to immigration authorities, Xiao Nuo had left Australia and flown back to China to visit family on September 10th. So the question arose, if he was in China, why would he need to hire a driver to travel from Sydney to Perth? Who was he hiring the driver for? What purpose would it serve? Nothing about it made any sense. With this lead, police decided to pursue a new direction in the investigation. They began examining the highway connecting Sydney and Perth. This is one of the longest roads in Australia, stretching approximately 2,500 miles, crossing nearly the entire continent from east to west. Even driving non-stop, the journey would take at least 2 days and nights. It's an arduous trip through some of the most desolate and remote desert areas. The investigators patiently went through all the reports of unusual vehicles recorded on this route during September. And then, among the piles of files, they found a very strange photograph. According to the records, late on the night of September 30th, just a few hours after the murder occurred in Perth, a patrol officer was on duty on the Nullarbor Plain. This is an area located on the border between South Australia and Western Australia, known as one of the most desolate and harsh places in Australia. The land is barren, the climate is arid year-round, and the population is extremely sparse. Anyone wanting to drive across this plain must prepare carefully, bringing enough food and water because you can travel hundreds of miles without seeing a single person or gas station. During his night shift, the patrol officer noticed a car moving along the road. What struck him as odd was that according to the system records, this same vehicle had crossed the Nullarbor Plain twice within the past week. Once traveling from east to west, and now heading back in the opposite direction. The officer's professional instincts told him something wasn't normal here. Why would a car need to make multiple trips back and forth on this thousands of miles route in such a short time? Without hesitation, he decided to signal the vehicle to stop for inspection. Under the dim glow of headlights in the middle of the desolate night, the officer approached the car and peered inside. There were 2 Asian men in the vehicle, both sitting silently with expressionless faces, cold as stone. After requesting their documents and verifying their identities, the officer confirmed the relationship between the 2 men. One was a hired driver, while the other was a passenger, a man with the surname Yue. A thorough check revealed nothing unusual. All the paperwork was in order. However, to be safe and to keep a record just in case, the officer decided to photograph both men before letting them continue their journey. It was precisely this seemingly minor decision that would later crack the case wide open. When investigators compared the photograph to images of Xiao Nuo, they discovered that the passenger surnamed Yue in the photo and Xiao Nuo, husband of the victim's son Dan, looked nearly identical. It wasn't just a vague resemblance. They were so alike that they could be confirmed as the same person. Continuing to search immigration records, police found another key detail. This man named Yue had entered Australia on September 23, 2010, and departed back to China on October 3rd of the same year. This timeline matched up disturbingly well with when the murder occurred. Through cooperation between Chinese and Australian police, it was revealed that this Yue was a friend of Xiao Nuo and had even served as best man at Xiao Nuo's wedding. Looking at photos from their identification documents, the 2 men bore a striking resemblance to each other. Through the joint investigation between Chinese and Australian police, Xiao Nuo's elaborate murder plot was finally exposed. On September 10, 2010, Xiao Nuo used his Australian passport to fly back to China. Officially, he was visiting family, but in reality, he was taking the first step of his sinister plan. In Shenyang, he sought out a close friend surnamed Yue, who looked remarkably similar to him. For some reason, he convinced his friend to lend him his passport. On September 23rd, Xiao Nuo impersonated his friend, using the passport bearing Yue's name to leave China. He flew directly to Sydney, Australia. By doing this, according to official records, Xiao Nuo was still in China, while the person entering Australia was someone completely different named Yue. On September 24th, right after arriving in Sydney, Xiao Nuo placed the job ad for a driver in the Chinese newspaper. He needed someone to drive him from Sydney to Perth, a distance of about 2,500 miles across the Australian continent. After finding a suitable person, the two set off. On September 28th, Xiao Nuo arrived in Perth. There he began preparing his murder weapons, a spear gun, an iron hammer, and a knife. Everything was arranged and ready. Additionally, he used a fake identity to purchase a used white Magna sedan, the car that would be used to stake out and trap his victim. On September 30th, the fateful day arrived. Xiao Nuo carefully disguised himself with a long wig, then brought his weapons and drove the Magna to stake out the apartment his wife was renting. He waited patiently. That evening, at 7:30 p.m., when Sun Dan and her mother drove up, Xiao Nuo struck. After committing the horrific murder, he calmly left the Magna at the scene, got into the car with the driver he had hired beforehand, and drove through the night straight towards Sydney. On October 3rd, Xiao Nuo used his friend Yue's passport to board a flight leaving Australia, returning to China. At this point, his seemingly perfect murder plan was complete. All traces had been erased, and his alibi had been fully established. If that dedicated patrol officer hadn't had sharp instincts, this case might have remained an unsolved mystery forever. On the very day of the murder, Xiao Nuo's mother had taken the initiative to pick up her granddaughter Kiki and bring her to her own home. At first glance, this seemed like a normal action, a grandmother who loved her grandchild. But when viewed in the context of all the events that followed, it took on an entirely different meaning. When police came to interview her, Xiao Nuo's mother appeared calm and cooperative. She stated that her son had left Perth on September 11th to return to China and had not come back since. By the time of the murder, he had been in China for over 2 weeks. She also said that her last contact with her son was at the end of September, when Xiao Nuo had called her. Furthermore, she emphasized that throughout the time she was caring for her granddaughter, she never left the house and no one came to visit or entered her home. This statement was clearly intended to reinforce her son's alibi. However, digital evidence exposed her lies. Police discovered that on a computer in her home, 2 days before the murder, someone had logged into Xiao Nuo's gaming account. Who else would use his personal gaming account if not him? Moreover, surveillance cameras installed near the mansion captured Xiao Nuo's silhouette in the early morning of September 29th. This evidence clearly showed that after arriving in Perth on September 28th, Xiao Nuo didn't stay at a hotel or anywhere else. He hid in his own mother's house to lay low and prepare for the killing. What truly sent chills down people's spines was the extent of this mother's complicity. She not only knew about her son's murder plan in advance, but actively assisted him. Taking her granddaughter home on the exact day of the murder wasn't a coincidence. It was part of a prearranged plan to ensure the child wouldn't be at the scene and wouldn't witness her mother being killed. After the murder, she continued to cover for her son, providing false statements to police, trying every possible way to misdirect the investigation. 6 years after the murder, in 2016, justice finally caught up with her. Charged with misleading police and harboring a suspect, Xiao Nuo's mother was arrested at Perth Airport as she was preparing to leave Australia. Although Australian police had confirmed that Xiao Nuo was the killer of Sun Dan and her mother, there was no extradition treaty between China and Australia, so Australian authorities couldn't directly arrest Xiao Nuo. Through the efforts of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Interpol, in April 2012, Chinese police arrested Xiao Nuo on charges of using another person's passport to leave the country. After his arrest, Xiao Nuo was brought to police headquarters for interrogation. However, when faced with a barrage of questions from investigators about the case, he chose to remain silent, not uttering a single word. Instead, he kept repeating stories about his two unhappy marriages, as if trying to play the victim of love and marriage. According to Xiao Nuo's account, his marriage to Sun Dan had been troubled from the start. After living together for only about a year, the couple had already begun to despise each other. Daily disagreements combined with interference from both sets of parents caused conflicts to escalate, pushing the marriage to the brink of collapse. In 2010, when Sun Dan officially filed for divorce, Xiao Nuo realized this time was completely different from his previous marriage. With his first wife, the divorce had gone relatively smoothly. Both sides signed the papers and went their separate ways. But Sun Dan was different. She didn't just want a divorce, she was quietly gathering evidence against him, preparing for a legal battle to win custody of their daughter and the majority of their assets. Xiao Nuo was furious. It wasn't just about potentially losing his child and money. More importantly, his ego was severely wounded. He felt like he was being defeated, humiliated, his pride as a pampered rich kid challenged as never before. That's why he decided he had to solve this problem his own way, in the most thorough and ruthless manner possible. The case dragged on for many years. Police from both China and Australia worked closely together throughout the investigation, gathering evidence and building the case file. It wasn't until January 2016, a full 5 years after the murder, that Xiao Nuo was finally brought to trial. The trial took place in Shanghai, China. Although there was no extradition treaty between China and Australia, because the victim Sun Dan was a Chinese citizen, under international law, China had full jurisdiction to prosecute. After reviewing all the evidence and hearing arguments from all sides, the court found Xiao Nuo guilty of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. The second case also involves a Chinese woman, but this one occurred in Texas, USA. On the afternoon of Thursday, November 18, 2021, the Harris County Sheriff's Office received an emergency call from a man named Christopher Michael Collins. His voice sounded anxious as he explained that earlier that afternoon, his wife had suddenly sent him an urgent text message saying there was a stranger inside their home. After that message, all communication with her was completely cut off. He had tried calling, texting, everything he could think of, but received no response whatsoever. That's why Collins decided to call the police, asking them to send someone to the house to check on the situation. Around 3:25 p.m. that same day, officers arrived at the address provided. They approached the front door and knocked, but no one answered. The house was completely silent, not a sound to be heard. From the outside, everything appeared normal with no signs of anything wrong inside. Windows were shut tight. The front door was intact with no signs of forced entry or damage. After carefully observing and determining that the house appeared safe, the officers decided to leave. However, right at that moment, the man who had called in the report, Collins, showed up. He rushed to the front door, out of breath. He told the officers that about 2 weeks earlier, someone had broken into his home and stolen some property. Because of this, he was very worried after receiving that strange message from his wife and then being unable to reach her. He asked the police to accompany him inside to check whether something serious had happened. The officers agreed to Collins's request. He took out his keys and unlocked the door while the officers followed closely behind. And when the door opened, a horrifying scene appeared before their eyes, leaving everyone stunned. Right in the middle of the living room, Collins's Chinese wife, Liang Yuanhua, lay motionless on the floor. She was dead. A sleep mask still covered her face, and a bag was wrapped tightly around her head. A preliminary examination revealed she had been shot to death. The crime scene displayed very distinctive characteristics that immediately caught the investigators' attention. Based on the method of killing at the scene, police quickly formed some initial conclusions. The fact that the victim's eyes were covered with a sleep mask and a bag was wrapped around her head suggested that the killer had a personal relationship with the deceased. Perpetrators who know their victims often don't want the victim to see their face in those final moments. This is a psychological indicator that the killer may have been someone close to the victim, perhaps even very intimate. Those who regularly follow criminal cases will likely immediately think of the familiar saying among investigators, "It's always the husband." This is an unwritten rule. Because in most murder cases where the victim is a married woman, the husband is typically suspect number one. So in this case, was Collins really the killer? Collins and Yuan Hua were a fairly active couple on social media, especially on TikTok and Instagram. They frequently shared moments from their daily lives and had attracted a decent following. The husband, Collins, was 41 years old at the time. His wife, Yuan Hua, was born in China and was 4 years older than him, making her 45 at the time of the incident. The couple was married but had no children together. Unlike what many people assume about international marriages, where an Asian woman marries an American man through matchmaking or online dating, Collins and Yuan Hua's relationship had a very natural beginning. The two had met, gotten to know each other, and fallen in love in Arizona 15 years earlier. It was a love that blossomed from real life, not from any arrangement or calculation. From the moment the crime was discovered, Collins worked hard to convince police that his wife had been killed by a stranger who broke into their home. He repeatedly emphasized this theory, trying to steer the investigation toward searching for an outside perpetrator. However, it seemed Collins tried too hard, overacted to such an extent that it actually made the experienced investigators feel something was off. Their professional instincts told them that this husband's story had too many holes, too many details that didn't add up and couldn't be explained. The first and most obvious red flag was the crime scene itself. Collins claimed someone had broken into the house, but when police thoroughly examined the entire home, they found no evidence whatsoever of forced entry from the outside. The front door was intact with no pry marks or signs of being forced open. All windows were shut tight and still locked, with no broken or cracked glass anywhere. There were no unfamiliar footprints, no scratches on the door frames, nothing to indicate that a stranger had tried to force their way into this house. This was exactly why, initially, when officers arrived and observed from outside, they had nearly concluded the house was completely safe and were about to leave. If the killer was an intruder as Collins claimed, how did they get inside when every entrance was locked from within? The second red flag concerned Collins's behavior after receiving the emergency text from his wife. According to his statement, his wife had sent a message saying there was a stranger in the house, then went completely silent. In that situation, anyone's first reaction would be to do everything possible to find out what was happening to their loved one. And Collins had told police that their home had a security camera system installed. So the question arose, when he received the distress message from his wife, why didn't he immediately check his phone to view the security cameras and see what was happening inside the house? Why did he choose to call the police first instead? This was a completely illogical reaction for a husband supposedly worried about his wife's safety. Not only that, but Collins's whereabouts at the time of the crime were also highly suspicious. He claimed he was at the gym working out. However, when police pulled the surveillance footage from the gym, they discovered something quite different. During the 45 minutes he was there, Collins kept going in and out repeatedly, never focusing on his workout like a normal person would. He just went through the motions with a few half-hearted exercises. His actual workout time amounted to barely 5 minutes. Most of the remaining time, he wandered around, going in and out constantly as if waiting for something. Later, the camera recorded him walking to the gym's cafe area, and it was right there that he made the call to police. The next suspicious detail made police even more doubtful. Collins told officers there were signs of robbery in the house, pointing out that Yuan Hua's wallet was missing. This seemed to support the theory that an intruder had broken in and stolen property. However, when police conducted an expanded search, they found Yuan Hua's wallet along with her cosmetics bag in a place no one expected, inside Collins's personal locker at the fitness center. Why would the wife's belongings be in the husband's gym locker? If a burglar had really broken in and taken these items, how would they have ended up there? During interrogation, Collins insisted to police that neither he nor his wife had ever purchased any self-defense weapons or ammunition. However, the truth was the complete opposite. When police searched Collins's personal belongings, they found a live .22 caliber round in his pocket. This is ammunition used for small caliber handguns. And coincidentally, the autopsy results showed that Yuan Hua had been shot and killed by exactly this type of weapon. This match couldn't be coincidental. During the search of the house, They found a life insurance policy worth a staggering $250,000. What's notable is that this policy was signed by both spouses, and the signing date was just 2 days before the murder. Only 2 days before Yuan Hua was killed, the couple had completed the paperwork for this massive life insurance policy. And throughout his entire statement to police, Collins never once mentioned the existence of this insurance policy. He deliberately concealed it as if it had never existed. When all the pieces were put together, the complete picture became clear. A life insurance policy worth hundreds of thousands of dollars signed just 2 days before the wife's death. A husband with suspicious behavior, contradictory statements, and a bullet in his pocket matching the murder weapon. All of this revealed a clear motive: insurance money. Collins appeared to have planned to murder his wife in order to collect the massive payout from the insurance policy. With sufficient evidence in hand, police decided to act. On November 24th, just 6 days after the crime occurred, they went to his home to arrest Collins. He was handcuffed and taken to the police station. The following day, November 25th, investigators conducted an interrogation to clarify further details of the case. However, things didn't proceed as smoothly as expected. When the first hearing was scheduled, Collins was unable to attend. The reason given was that he was experiencing mental health issues and needed to be transferred to specialized medical facilities for examination and evaluation. This development led many to question: did Collins truly have mental health problems, or was this just a stalling tactic, a way to buy time and find an escape route for himself? Regardless, the judge presiding over the case set Collins' bail at $150,000. This was no small amount, reflecting the severity of the charges he was facing. The court also scheduled the next hearing for December. At that time, Collins would have to stand before the court and face the murder charges against him. The truth would finally be revealed, and justice would be served for the unfortunate woman, Yuan Hua, and those are the 2 cases for today. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.